The anime begins with our protagonist, Takuto, who is enjoying an online game from his bed, but after a few seconds, he loses consciousness. Slowly, he feels his mind drifting elsewhere, and when he opens his eyes, the first thing he sees is that he's in a place he's never seen before. But instead of panicking, he becomes quite excited at being able to breathe in the fresh air. That's when a woman approaches him to greet him, and he's astonished to recognize her as Atu. She confirms he's right and even calls him king. Here it's explained that while Takuto was sick, he used to play a 4X strategy game set in a dark fantasy world called Eternal Nations, and the character he adored most in that beloved game was this woman, Atu. Realizing it's really her, the first thing Takuto does is wonder to himself what he's supposed to do, curious if this is some kind of roleplay scenario. On top of that, he figures that if she called him king, she might think he's the leader of the Mynoghra. At that moment, Atu lets out a soft laugh and tells him to calm down. She then informs him that he managed to clear the nightmare difficulty using the hardest civilization to play, Mynoghra, the Ruin, and that he's the legendary player who shines at the top of the rankings, Takuto era. This leaves him in shock, and now Atu lets him know that she remembers everything too, referring to all the things he told her while playing, how they conquered the world together multiple times and all the times they died. She then asks him not to worry, as she can remember everything perfectly. After processing all this for a moment, Takuto mentions that his playstyle was centered around using her, and that perhaps he had hoped to reach the strength she possesses. That's why he's so happy to finally be able to talk to her in person. Atu tells him she feels the same, saying that being able to speak with him brings her immense joy. A few seconds later, Takuto wonders if he's in paradise, wanting to know if she's the one who brought him here. Atu replies that she didn't, and that when she woke up, she was already here, so she doesn't believe this is paradise. If she had to say something, she thinks they're in a world similar to Eternal Nations. After taking his hand, she tells him she's happy to meet him in person and asks if he wants to start over together. Here, she brings up the possibility that they're in a world like Eternal Nations, or maybe even the world he came from, and even though it's unfamiliar, she wants to build a kingdom together, just like they've done before. Takuto reflects on this, unsure of what's going on or where exactly he is, but since they're already together, he accepts the idea of doing it again, of reliving those happy days in this world. Now resolved, he tells her they'll build a kingdom together, a kingdom just for the two of them. This makes Atu smile with joy, though immediately afterward, she delivers an ominous line, introducing herself as Atu of the Mire, daughter of the mud who will destroy the world, and from now on, his body and mind belong to her. At the end, Takuto mentions that it's a little embarrassing, something Atu admits as well. Putting that aside, he tells her that she's his only subordinate and that she will be his advisor and right hand. In addition, their civilization is the most evil, but as a specialist in domestic affairs, she wants to remind him of what the Mynoghra always do first: isolate themselves. Later on, Takuto uses the emergency creation option to summon an insect-type scouting unit. They both agree that the creature is disgusting, but setting that aside, Takuto reminds Atu that Mynoghra is a peaceful civilization that rules over evil and ruin, something they must keep in mind as they act. In short, they must avoid being discovered by others, so they need to gather information without being seen. He then orders the long-legged insect to explore the surroundings, and to give it extra motivation, Atu warns it not to disappoint Master Takuto, which causes the insect to scurry away in fear. Seeing that, Atu confirms that the unit functions as if it were under her command, while Takuto realizes that he can share its vision, just like he did in the game. He then tells her that he spent 100 magic points to summon the long-legged scout, which means they have another 100 points left. Building the settlement that will serve as their initial base will cost about 20 points, so they can't afford to waste any. He also mentions that he would have liked to create a warrior unit to have military strength, but he can't afford to do that after summoning the scout. Atu declares that she'll work hard to be his military force, or at least she'd like to say that. Takuto notes that Atu, the heroine unit, will develop over time, but for now, her strength is just 3. That means they're at very high risk, since any encounter with the enemy could completely wipe them out, which leads Takuto to acknowledge that the difficulty level is truly high. Sometime later, Takuto remains focused on observing the surroundings through the long-legged insect's vision, gaining a better idea of where they are. With this, he confirms that for now, everything is forest, and he hasn't found any animals or monsters. Atu comments that forests are perfect for hiding, but it's strange that there are no animals. She also apologizes for not being very helpful at the moment. He tells her not to worry about that. Just having her by his side is enough for him. Those words make her incredibly happy, and seeing her reaction, Takuto realizes that he can now see her personality more clearly, something he hadn't been able to fully appreciate before. Suddenly, he discovers something important. Not far from their location, there's a dark elf community, Atu assumes it's normal in a fantasy world and says that dark elves are neutral but tend toward neutral evil, so that's a relief. Takuto wonders if that means they're in eternal nations, and also points out that it's problematic to have another settlement nearby, as it would be best to avoid war. Faced with this issue, Atu suggests they run away together, something he agrees to without hesitation. This is because in Mynoghra, they love peace and harmony. She supports that, even saying that war is for barbarians. Once they've made this decision, Takuto tells her that they'll first keep watch on the elves while scouting the surroundings, and if things go badly, they'll simply run. Atu happily accepts his orders, and as they cheerfully embrace this new plan, a few dark elves approach and stare at them in surprise. This is when we're shown what had been happening with the group of dark elves just moments earlier. One of them tells their leader, the warrior Gia, that they should leave these cursed lands and also wants to know why they're leaving the forest. Gia explains that they've been driven out of their homeland and have nowhere else to go. The children won't last much longer, and since there's vegetation in this area, he believes there might be food. Another elf, named Emla, mentions that at the edge of the uncharted territory of Isekai lies a vast, cursed forest, the Cursed Lands, and according to old books, something truly evil has been sealed in those lands, something that prevents life from flourishing. Gia just laughs at that, thinking it's nothing more than superstition, and points out how well the trees are growing here. He then urges them not to give up and not to throw in the towel, saying that their pride and the spirits of their ancestors will show them how to overcome these hardships, even though, deep down, he admits that this forest gives him the creeps. Minutes later, they come across Takuto and Atu, and their first reaction is to freeze in place, sensing something ominous from that strange being, Takuto. Gia even feels like he's staring at the very embodiment of evil, and realizes that whatever action he takes next could affect the entire future of his tribe, so he must be cautious. With that in mind, the first thing he does is kneel on one knee to introduce himself as a dark elf of the Mazaram clan, and that his name is Gia Nagiv, the chief warrior. He then acknowledges that the one before him is someone of great importance, and for that reason, he apologizes for entering his forest without permission. Atu maintains her role and subtly praises them for acknowledging their position, then asks the reason why they're here. Gia responds that Mazaram, his dark elf clan, once lived in the central lands of Isekai. Since he begins giving too many details, Atu intimidatingly orders him to get to the point. Feeling the pressure, Gia quickly explains that they were persecuted and driven out of their home, and that's why they've come to this forest. In his mind, he criticizes himself for trying to embellish their situation, feeling the fear that Takuto and Atu can instill. Suddenly, Takuto tells them that they look very thin, and Atu prompts them to explain why. Without wasting time, Gia says they've run out of food, and in trying to throw off those chasing them, they haven't been able to gather any supplies. They've been like this for several days. While Takuto thinks it over, Gia silently wonders why they have to suffer so much, and what they did to deserve this. After all, they only want a place where they can live in peace. Out of nowhere, something rolls toward him, and seconds later, more of them arrive, giving off a sweet scent. Takuto tells them to take it and asks if they know what apples are. They taste great when cut into rabbit shapes. After picking one up, Gia replies that they don't, as these fruits are very different from what they're used to. He hesitates, unsure of what to do, aware of how rude it would be to reject such an offering. Suddenly, one of the dark elves takes a bite and exclaims how delicious it is, prompting the others to do the same and agree enthusiastically. As if that weren't enough, Takuto tells them he also has pears, then opens a portal through which he tosses a few toward them. Atu then asks Gia what's going on. Her king is offering help, and yet he's doing nothing about it. What Gia does is press his forehead to the ground in a pleading gesture and tells them that there are more like him who have fled to this place. There are even small children who are starving. That's why, with all the kindness behind this fruit offering, he would rather give it to them than eat it himself. Takuto is moved with compassion, and without thinking too much, he begins summoning a pile of fruit in front of the dark elves. This causes Atu to grow slightly agitated. As the food continues to pile up, Gia reflects on how dark elves are scorned for having fled from the light. It's said that the clan of light merely tolerates their existence, forcing them to live in the shadows, far from the light. On top of that, no one had ever offered them help. So upon receiving such an abundance of food, he asks Takuto who he really is, though Takuto ignores the question and insists they take the food. We then see the other dark elves still waiting, trying to endure. And as if it were a miracle, Gia arrives to tell them he has found food. From there, they prepare it to feed the children, and everyone feels relief that they managed to hold on just a little longer. One of the girls asks Gia where he got so much food, and he replies that they found it by chance, though in his mind, he can't stop picturing that mysterious being. Later that night, the elder Moltar approaches him to congratulate him on a job well done. The fruit he brought is truly exquisite, But what he really wants to know is what actually happened. After a brief pause, Jia tells him he encountered a legendary creature deep within the forest, and that, if he remembers correctly, Emily once mentioned something being sealed in the Cursed Lands. Moltar supposes it must be the King of Ruin, saying that there are still old legends and ancient books that speak of him. According to the writings, when the world reaches its limit, the King of Ruin will appear, bringing doom to all and forcing the world to start over from scratch. Moltar then says he doesn't know if that information is true, but he can't say for certain that it's a lie either. Jia also clarifies that the being never gave them his name, and he considered him so fearsome that it might very well be true that he is the King of Ruin himself. In his opinion, that being seemed beyond their understanding, however. A young woman served him and explained the king's words. Moltar comments that, even though they don't know for sure if he really is the King of Ruin, what he does know for certain is that he's not a good person. Now that he's eaten and recovered some of his magic, he can see things more clearly, and he's sure of one thing: this forest is not normal, and he should have realized that sooner. He then asks Jia what he gave in exchange for the food. But when he hears they gave nothing, he mocks the idea no evil being would ever give something for free. Jia explains that they simply answered his questions about their situation, nothing more, and he believes His Excellency helped them out of pure compassion. Because of this statement, Moltar suggests that Jia must have been bewitched by that evil being. He can't understand why Jia would speak of him so respectfully. Jia reminds him that they were starving and that in the face of a miracle like this, it's only natural to show respect even if it's to an evil being. It was that or die. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Moltar apologizes for the misunderstanding and tells Jia that he will go negotiate with this king himself, as it's his responsibility as their leader. Back with the other two, Atu scolds Takuto for wasting magic to summon all that food, but he replies that he felt sorry for them. She scolds him for giving such a simple excuse and reminds him that their civilization has only just been born, and they don't even know what surrounds them yet. Because she pouts in frustration, Takuto tells her he's willing to do anything she asks as compensation. She sees that as a bit too much, so she calms down and tries to rephrase her words more gently. As soon as Takuto tells her that he needs her, she completely changes her attitude to show him her absolute loyalty. Putting that topic aside, he brings up a problem he had. He couldn't communicate properly with the Dark Elves. It turns out that although he can speak normally with Atu, his words don't come out right in front of others, all because he's not good at communication. While he sinks into a bit of a depression over it, Atu does her best to cheer him up, and the long-legged insect watches them silently. Starting a new day, Moltar asks Jia if he's ready to see the king again, to which he replies, yes. Moltar mentions that the King of Ruin has already given them some charity, so they don't know what he might ask for in return later. Jia doesn't believe he would do something like that, since he didn't mention anything similar, but Moltar asks how he can be so sure he won't ask for anything. After all, that's how the world works, and evil will eventually demand its reward. However, he also acknowledges that in order to survive, they must make use of the king's power. Jia agrees with that, since even if they leave the forest, they would just end up wandering the world again, struggling to find food. And if that happens, it would eventually mean the downfall of the clan. Moltar reminds him that they came to the Dark Continent in search of a kingdom where they wouldn't be hunted, so this might be their last chance to achieve that. With nothing more to say, he tells him it's time to move, as the fate of their people rests on their shoulders. As they head out to see Takuto, they are being watched by the Longlegs, in other words, by him. When the Longlegs returns to Takuto, Atu tells him to be quiet since she's trying to talk to him, but he explains that he came back for a reason. That's when they receive the information that the Dark Elves are planning to visit him right now, and Atu assumes it must be because they've come to retrieve the food they left behind. Takuto mentions that it's not good to have beings from another culture and ideology nearby, as it could lead to conflict, so he'd prefer if they took the food and left as soon as possible. Atu asks if something's bothering him because of the look on his face, and he reminds her that he struggles to talk with others, so he's not sure if he'll be able to negotiate with them. Concerned for her king, Atu offers to handle the negotiations in his place, and tells him that if he needs anything, he just has to ask. Takuto agrees without complaint and tells her that he trusts her, which lifts her spirits. Later on, the two Dark Elves finally arrive, and Moltar thanks them for granting the audience, introducing himself as Moltar Kordal Mazaram, the elder of the clan. After receiving Atu's permission to speak, he thanks them for the food given to his people and asks for her name. This causes her expression to darken, but when Takuto allows her to answer, she informs them that he is Takuto Ira, Lord of the Apocalypse and King of Ruin. Moltar and Jia are surprised, but they keep their composure and assure him that their people will remember his name. Takuto feels relieved that everything is going smoothly for now, while Atu urges them to take the food and leave, as some of it is close to spoiling. Moltar asks what they can do to repay him for saving their people, but Atu replies that there's no need, since she doubts they have anything useful and knows their resources are scarce. Because of Moltar's insistence on repaying the favor, Takuto realizes things might be going in the wrong direction, so he whispers something to Atu about what they should do during the negotiation. This makes her pout, and she even says those elves don't know how to negotiate and that if they let them go, they'll just become a nuisance, suggesting they should just annihilate them and use them as decoration. Takuto asks her to calm down and points out that these dark elves are probably hoping for a mutually beneficial friendship. Instead of simply giving it to them, he believes it's better to accept whatever price they're willing to pay, as that would likely put them more at ease. Atu is surprised by his reasoning, finding it makes sense, and without further complaints, she informs the elves that her king is willing to accept an offer in exchange for his kindness. Moltar gratefully thanks them, visibly relieved, confirming Takuto's suspicions that the elder had feared they were up to something just because they were evil. Atu notices it too and calls them fools for thinking poorly of her king. When they try to deny it, she simply silences them. She then tries to come up with a suitable price, but since nothing comes to mind, Takuto brings up the topic of the outside world. That prompts Atao to request information about the outside, which Moltar agrees to share without issue. With that settled, Atu makes it clear that once they deliver that information, they must leave the forest. They try to ask for permission to remain there, but when Atu denies the request, Moltar tells Jia to remain silent out of respect for the king's decision. However, Takuto notices they're not entirely happy with this outcome, and he understands that if they are expelled, just like that, they will likely die elsewhere. After a few moments of thought, he comes up with a solution and stops them, inviting them to become his citizens. Before receiving an answer, Atu pulls him aside to speak with him privately, wanting to know what he's doing. Takuto explains that he intends to make use of the refugee system. He is aware that dark elves are neither good nor evil, so if they accept them as refugees into their civilization, only if it works like in the game, they'll eventually become just as evil as them. Atu tells him that it's possible for various evil species to coexist, but they are very different from the homunculi, the main citizens of Mynoghra, so there might be clashes between them. Takuto agrees that it's risky, but reminds her of something important, the appearance of the homunculi, and asks if she's truly okay with living only among them. Atu quickly agrees with him, saying it's impossible to even talk to the homunculi, and their appearance is mentally harmful. Once she understands his intentions, she turns to the Dark Elves and tells them that her king plans to found a nation here, so if they want to become his citizens, they must vow to protect him. Both of them are startled by the proposal, and respectfully, Moltar asks what will become of them if they accept. Atu responds that her king promises them eternal happiness, though she knows that's not really what they want to know. So she bluntly states that if they accept, they will become evil beings. Even so, she assures them that they are free to choose their people's fate, although in her opinion, they'll be much better off if they accept. Later, Takuto and Atu are walking alone through the forest, where she comments that the Dark Elves took quite a while to decide whether to become their citizens. But Takuto doesn't blame them, acknowledging that anyone would hesitate if told they'd become an evil being. That's when Atu points out that they've arrived at the Dark Elf camp, where Moltar notifies his people of their arrival so they can show proper respect. As expected, even though Takuto is wearing pajamas, from the Dark Elf's perspective, he appears as a malevolent being radiating an overwhelming pressure, to the point that one of them faints as he walks past. After Takuto takes his seat on a throne before everyone, Atu tells those present that they are now accepted as citizens of Mynoghra, their nation. At that moment, Takuto receives a notification asking if he wants to accept these Dark Elves into his nation, which he gladly agrees to. Upon doing so, the system informs him that he has officially founded a nation thanks to the increase in population, and once it's confirmed, Atu congratulates everyone and tells them that their king, Takuto Aira, will guarantee them happiness and safety. Here, Jia wonders to himself if this is all there is. They said they would eventually become evil, yet he doesn't feel any different. Suddenly, he begins to feel hatred rising from within, and images flash through his mind of those who hunted them, harmed them, and looked down on them. The same thing happens with Emily, who begins to feel a deep hatred toward all living beings. In the midst of all this, Takuto asks them if they're all right, and Jia reacts with joy upon hearing his voice, interpreting the overwhelming sensation as the happiness one feels when being protected. Moments later, all the Dark Elves shout his name with joy and tears in their eyes, surprising Takuto. Several days pass since the founding of the kingdom of Mynoghra, and while Takuto is looking at a map, he begins to tremble, believing they're doomed. Atu asks what's wrong, so Takuto simply shows her what he's holding, the map of the continent Moltar gave him. Suddenly, Takuto throws himself on the ground and throws a tantrum, now realizing they started in a terrible location. On this continent, there are already two large nations. One of them is the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, a nation of humans who worship Arlos, the sacred god, which means they are good beings. There is also the Elven nation, which worships nature, so they are also considered good. Because of this, Takuto and Atu believe that if these nations ever discover their evil nation, they'll likely greet them only to annihilate them afterward. The usual routine. In addition, he mentions that they still don't have a military force strong enough to face such large nations. In the end, the two of them start throwing a tantrum out of desperation, and to make things worse, Atu adds that these cursed lands don't have a single natural resource. Once they calm down, Takuto says that not everything is bad. He knows that under normal conditions, Mynoghra struggles with research. This is because its citizens, the homunculi, are quite dumb, although they are very fertile and not easily saddened. He also takes into account that the Dark Elves could compensate for that weakness, so he decides not to worry about it. At that moment, Atu senses something and suggests the idea of using the Dark Elves to learn more about the outside world. A while later, they are visited by Moltar and Gia, who introduce them to Emily, their assistant. He explains that she is intelligent and knows many stories and facts about other nations, so he believes she will be helpful. Atu tells them that their king appreciates such dedication, and they thank her for her kind words. Returning to the main topic, Atu explains that they will be assigned to key positions in Mynoghra's administration, a decision made by their king, so they cannot refuse. Once they accept the decision without complaint, Atu informs Moltar that he will be in charge of public affairs. Since they know he can use magic, they expect great things from him. As for Gia, he will continue serving as the chief warrior and lead Mynoghra's forces. He will also be responsible for recruiting personnel. Upon hearing that, Gia accepts his role enthusiastically, even declaring that, if necessary, he will annihilate any enemy, impale their corpse, and display it publicly. Takuto's reaction is to ask what he's even talking about, clearly frightened by the idea. Gia freezes at that, while Takuto explains that war is barbaric, and Atu informs them that their king prefers peace. Gia accepts this, still in shock, and wonders to himself why the King of Ruin is a pacifist. Moltar glances at him mockingly, and with the topic shifting, Atu tells them to rest first, and once they've recovered their strength, they should begin building houses. Moltar thanks her for her words and assures her that his knowledge will be of great use, unlike Gia's strength, which he boasts about so much. Feeling offended by that, Gia assures the king that he's full of energy, unlike that old man. Observing this, Atu whispers to Takuto that it seems they're both workaholics, and asks if they should send them out to gather resources. After thinking it over for a few seconds, Takuto suggests preparing the land instead. Seeing it as a good idea, Atu asks Moltar if they can gather wood without harming the forest too much. Moltar agrees without hesitation and comments that if they plan to build using large trees, they will make it happen. With that settled, Gia finds himself confused once again, as even though Takuto is the king of ruin, he doesn't want to destroy the forest. Takuto sends them off with his best wishes and reminds the three of them that they must reforest, something that catches them completely off guard. Gia asks what that even means, which surprises Atu, who quickly realizes that not even Moltar or Emily are familiar with the term. Meanwhile, Takuto comes to understand that the technological level of this world focuses mainly on building fortresses, revealing the shape of their knowledge tree. Atu then asks if they're familiar with military magic and the 6 primary elements, to which Moltar replies that he knows of the 4 elements, which are the most basic form of magic. On the other hand, Emla mentions that she hasn't heard of any other nations using that so-called military magic. Thanks to this, Atu and Takuto realize that this world hasn't yet reached the level of the 6 main elements and is technologically behind compared to other worlds, which is quite strange. Moltar interprets their comments as meaning their magical technology is 1 level lower than what they expected. Atu tells him he's right, but adds that they can surpass other nations once they advance further. Returning to the previous topic, she explains that reforesting means planting trees in harvested land to preserve the environment, something essential if they want to secure resources in the future. Emil points out that the level of magical technology has nothing to do with planting trees, and Moltar agrees, saying that trees normally take centuries to mature. In response, Atu clarifies that reforesting involves using the primary elements to speed up tree growth, a form of wisdom brought by their king, Takuto Ira. As they react with surprise upon hearing this, Takuto does the same, fully aware that it's a complete lie. Still not stopping there, Atu tells them that their king's wisdom spans many fields, so they're very fortunate to be under his command. In addition to that, she tells them that the fruits from earlier were created by him. Upon hearing this, Emily shares that she tried planting the seeds from the grapes, and they've finally started to sprout. Atu and Takuto show interest in this, and that's when he realizes something important. The fruit he created came from the modern world, meaning he can use emergency creation to make things that didn't exist in the game. Suddenly, he activates emergency creation to test something, and within seconds, a coin appears in his hand. Confirming his theory, he now understands that with this power, he can create gunpowder, metals, and gasoline. And while it requires a great amount of magic, there's no doubt it's an extremely powerful ability. Atu congratulates Emle for her accomplishment, while Takuto receives a message from the system informing him that Mynoghra has been granted a new national trait called Divine Privilege. This ability refers to emergency creation, which allows him to produce any food, resource, or other items he already knows. In addition, products from unacquired technologies will consume more magic depending on the complexity of the technology. In a change of scene, we see a priestess who says she has had a vision of the apocalypse and that it originates from the cursed lands of the Dark Continent. She is then greeted by a cardinal, who tells her they must prepare, as barbarians have appeared in the northern province. Once she agrees, she quietly thinks to herself that something is beginning to unfold in this world.